Hi, today I want to talk to you about nourishment. What is nourishment? Nourishment we will define here as a need of a small baby to have a contact with a mother or a primary caretaker. So nourishment is of course breastfeeding, but it's also the connection between a mother and a child. You can be nourished through gaze, you can be nourished through touch, you can be nourished through connection that you share together, through movement, through song, through words. Basically, it is the way a baby receives that contact. Of course, through breastfeeding, baby learns about life because that is the only way it interacts with its surroundings. So it learns whether life will provide, whether there will be enough for it or not, whether it needs to fight, it needs to manipulate, or it just is left in a pit and desperation of not having, of life will never provide, there will not be enough for me. And then that trauma we carry out in adulthood. And for the sake of the understanding, I will share my personal story because I, as a baby, was not well nourished. Of course, just for clarification, this is not something that I'm blaming on my mother because I was a third child and she wasn't able to give. She gave as much as she could have. Of course, I needed years maybe of therapy to understand that, but I don't blame anyone because I realized this was my experience, this was my story, and me as an adult woman needed to own it. And I will share how I owned it and how I found healing. So, yes, I carried that feeling of not having enough in my adulthood. It started, of course, with connection that I had in relationships, where I felt like I was only attracted to those boys back then who were not able to give enough, and I was attracted to them because I needed the completion of that story from my childhood. And the funny thing is that there were plenty of other wonderful boys who were able to give, but the trick was that I wasn't able to even see them. They were invisible to me because that was something that was new, that was something that was unexpected. So unconsciously I was going towards that what felt safe, even though it felt painful and uncomfortable. After, of course, I worked on myself and I became aware that the underlying issue was not the story I had with a certain boyfriend, but the story I carried in my body as a baby that I will never be able to receive. That was like a painful trauma. That is like a painful that leaves you, that left me stuck in time. Because when we experience something like that, especially in such early years, but also in any trauma, we don't feel like time is flowing. We feel like we're frozen and that we will never get out of it. It feels existential. Yeah, that is actually the interesting part, that we are drawn to recreate these traumatic stories over and over again. And what helped me, yes, of course, was contact in the beginning, when I became aware that maybe there are people who can give something and I will be able to receive. But once I opened up that capacity inside of me to receive, then I was able to see someone who is maybe able to give. And I started creating different kinds of relationships. But also, what's important to know that even though I was able to receive, I would sometimes feel like I would regress into a baby in that relationship. And what would happen was that I would be so needy and I would be so demanding. And of course, my partner wasn't always able to give. Maybe he didn't want to, maybe he needed some time for himself, or maybe, yes, he didn't. He just was not good enough for me and he didn't want to respond to my needs. But I wasn't able to make that clarification inside of me because I was reaching out and I was demanding and I needed that. And I needed his nourishment. I needed him to give me that nourishment because otherwise I would cease to exist. This is how deep that went. And I'm sure it does go for many of you. So I want to share how I found healing. I found healing in myself, and this is what I want to share. We can find good partners, we can find beautiful connections, but if we don't have that capacity inside of us to own our needs, to fulfill our needs, to be with ourselves, we will not be able to receive, and in the moments we will feel too demanding or too selfish, and we will not be able to even see our partner's needs, and we will not be able to make that clarification. How do I even know if somebody is good enough for me? How do I even know if somebody really treats me the way I wanted to be treated, the way I deserve to be treated? Because it's so existential. So we'd run after carrots. If you give me a crumble, I will take it. I just need to have something. Yes, so anyway, I realized that I needed to surrender to the pain of not having, to pain of not being nourished. And surrendering to that pain, of course, involved a lot of crying, a lot of days, sometimes even weeks of feeling like I was in this pit of emptiness, of unfulfilledness, if that's even a word, of desperation. And what I did, I was learning how to nourish myself, how to really be there for myself unconditionally, through self-touch, through self-soothing words. And I created a guided experience which is called I Am Love, where I share some of these practices, or just the way of being with you, and I will leave you a link so you can experience it for yourself. So, but I also want to share something. This was a story. Everything that I shared with my mom and with my boyfriend, that was a story. And that story, yes, it had characters, it had plot, it had better days and worse days, it had its scenarios and things like that. But through that story, through that human perspective, I would always just run in circles, and I would just always recreate that story. So I was never able to go out of that story. And what helped me is that I needed to see for myself, to feel that there is something inside of me that is beyond that story, that was never a part of that story, that was not neutral, but free from that story. And that part, of course, was my soul, was my essence, and was my divinity. That was a part of me that was there throughout me reliving and constantly experiencing that story, and it never interfered in that. It was just there with its presence. And once I was able to expand myself, so to say, to that presence of my essence and of my divinity, I was able to surrender my pain. Because surrendering to pain, as I mentioned, is we need to know what we are surrendering to. We don't just surrender to this story. We don't surrender to another person. Although, yes, after we surrender to ourselves, we can surrender to another person. That can be a beautiful experience, to create a relationship from that sovereign place, when it's not existential, when we can be who we are, we can see another person who they are, and we can be present with them. That is free love, when we are not demanding. But of course, yes, we can see if somebody treats us right or not, and then we can make a decision whether this is nourishing and good for us, or we want to leave. So what I wanted to share is, once I had this stable contact with my essence, this was healing for me. And I also realized, I became aware that that was the unity that I was longing for in the first place. It was not unity with my mother, which of course was a reflection of this higher, if I can say it like that, unity. And it's the unity with my essence, unity with my soul. It's the completion. I found the completion only when I became aware that I needed to surrender to that inner divinity. And yes, that is a painful process. To surrender, it means to completely let go and without knowing what's going to happen. It was completely, it was frightening. But then once I was able to surrender, I felt this essence holding me. And this was the essence of true love, of self-love, of love, the only love that is. And that love is the one that expands to every experience, with every person, with every human, with every situation, with the life itself. This was the love, if I can say it like that. I felt my essence holding me, and this is the ultimate nourishment, if I can say it like that. This was the ultimate nourishment, because that was completion. And after that completion, I was able to see my story changing. Not only how I interact with people in my life and relationships that I have, but also the story from the past changed. I could see I wasn't able to resent my mother. There was only love for her. I could see her struggles as well. I could see all of this past experiencing changing right before my eyes. Now, I know that this may sound a little bit abstract, but it's a very concrete and embodied feeling. It's the feeling like when I have brought this presence in the now moment. It's like it echoed through time and space, and it changed everything. So yes, I have actually also created one guided experience which is called time travel, which I will also leave you a link, because that also helped me through this process, because I, as myself, with this connection, consciously traveled in the moment when I was that baby, and I held myself. And I promised myself, I made this commitment to myself that I will be there for myself unconditionally in eons of time, that I will never lose this connection. That connection is the only connection that matters. So yes, that connection with this inner light is the completion that I was longing for. That was the essence of healing. Yes, so I wanted to share this with you because this was a very intimate and important experience. And if there is a chance that this maybe resonates with you and that you find value in that, I'm happy to be there. And thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.